"Fix this car and I'll marry you." Those words weren't a promise. They were meant as a cruel joke to humiliate. A black mechanic at a glittering gala. But what happened next turned mockery into silence, and silence into awe. As the powerful elite watched a man they dismissed prove his worth in a way no amount of money could deny. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers and golden light. The kind of space where deals worth millions were sealed over champagne and whispered laughter. Michael didn't belong here, at least not in the eyes of those who circled the room in silk gowns and tailored suits. He wasn't a CEO or an investor or a man with a powerful last name. He was a mechanic, a black man whose hands still carried faint traces of grease, no matter how many times he scrubbed them. He hadn't come for the gala. He hadn't come to rub shoulders with billionaires. He was only there because the organizers needed someone to tend to their stalled luxury cars outside. But when he stepped through the doors, the atmosphere shifted. The scent of oil clung faintly to him, and eyes turned his way, not with respect but with judgment. Then she saw him, Vivian Cross, the CEO whose empire was whispered about in every boardroom. She was elegance and power wrapped in one. A woman whose voice could silence a room, and whose words could cut deeper than any blade. When her eyes landed on Michael, her lips curled into a smile that was anything but kind. "Well, well," she announced, her voice sharp enough to pierce the music. "What do we have here? A mechanic crashing my gala? Tell me, did someone lose their chauffeur?" Laughter rippled through the room. Some turned their glasses, others whispered cruel jokes. Michael felt the sting, but he didn't flinch. He had lived with these looks all his life, looks that said he was less, that his labor was all he was worth. But here, among chandeliers and marble, the sting felt heavier. Vivian stepped closer, her heels striking the floor like a queen approaching her subject. "Tell me," she sneered, "are you good for anything besides fixing broken engines? Or is that all your life amounts to?" He could have bowed his head, walked out, and let the humiliation pass. But something in his chest refused to bend. His voice, calm and steady, broke through the laughter. "I fix what others give up on. That's more than most people can say." The laughter faltered, if only for a breath. Vivian's eyes narrowed. She wasn't used to defiance, especially not from someone she considered beneath her. And so, with a mocking smile, she decided to make him into entertainment. "Fine then," she said loudly enough for every guest to hear. "My Lamborghini outside hasn't worked in months. None of the experts I pay could fix it. So here's the deal. If you can make that engine roar tonight, right now I'll marry you." The crowd gasped, then roared with laughter. A mechanic? Marry a CEO worth billions? To them it was absurd. A cruel joke, nothing more. But Michael didn't laugh. He didn't even blink. "Show me the car," he said quietly, but with a strength that cut through the noise like steel through silk. The air shifted. Guests leaned in closer, eager to see the spectacle unfold. They wanted to watch him fail, to laugh at his humiliation. But Michael wasn't playing for their amusement. This wasn't about a game. This was about dignity, pride, and proving that worth wasn't measured by wealth or status. And when he walked toward that Lamborghini under the cold glow of the moon, every step carried the weight of a man who had been underestimated one too many times. The crowd spilled out of the ballroom, curiosity pulling them like moths toward fire. Glasses of champagne were still in their hands, their laughter sharp and expectant. They believed they were about to witness a performance, a spectacle in which a mechanic would fail publicly, reduced to nothing more than the butt of a joke. Vivian walked behind Michael, her gown shimmering in the moonlight, her eyes filled with smugness. To her, this was a show of dominance. She had seen countless men fold under her wit, and this one, this mechanic with oil-stained hands, would be no different. The Lamborghini sat gleaming in the parking lot like a caged beast. Its sleek black frame reflected the lights of the building, but under the hood it was nothing more than an expensive failure. Vivian folded her arms and nodded toward it. "There it is," she said coldly. "A machine far too complex for you, I imagine." Michael didn't answer. He didn't trade words because words weren't what fixed engines. He stepped toward the car, opened the hood, and bent over the engine like a surgeon at work. The crowd murmured behind him. Some laughed, some mocked openly. "Does he even know what he's doing?" A voice snickered. "Maybe he'll mistake it for a taxi engine." Another added, "Imagine the story tomorrow. A mechanic tried to marry a CEO and couldn't even fix a car." Michael shut them out. The noise faded as his mind sharpened into focus. He had spent his life in garages where brokenness was all around him, machines abandoned, written off, declared hopeless, yet he always found a way to breathe life back into them. This car was no different. He ran his hands along the parts, listening, feeling, smelling the faint traces of fuel. To him, engines spoke a language, a quiet rhythm of what worked and what didn't. Where others saw complexity, he saw truth. Minutes passed. Sweat formed on his brow. He worked with precision, loosening, tightening, connecting, adjusting. His world became nothing but the engine before him and the faint echo of his father's voice. Dignity, son, is not something people hand you. You earn it with the work of your hands, and you protect it by never bowing to mockery. Vivian watched from a few steps away. Her confidence at first was unshakable. She expected him to falter, to fumble, to rise defeated with grease on his hands and shame on his face. But the longer he worked, the more unsettled she became. His movements weren't clumsy. They were exact, measured, certain. This wasn't a desperate man gambling for respect. This was a master at work. The whispers in the crowd began to change. "He looks like he knows what he's doing," someone murmured. "Look at the focus." Another whispered, maybe he might actually... The sentence trailed off, but the possibility hung in the air like static. Michael tightened one last bolt, wiped his hands on a rag, and closed the hood. Silence fell over the crowd. He didn't glance at Vivian or the guests. Instead, he slid into the driver's seat, placed the key into the ignition, and turned it. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Then, with a roar that cracked the night open, the Lamborghini came alive. The engine growled deep, strong, flawless, as though it had only been sleeping all this time, waiting for the right hands to awaken it. The crowd gasped. Some clapped, others stared with jaws slack. No one laughed anymore. The sound of the engine drowned out their arrogance, shattering the assumption that he was less. Michael stepped out slowly, his posture tall, his face calm. He met Vivian's eyes unflinching. "I believe," he said quietly, his voice carrying like thunder through the stunned silence. "You made me an offer." Vivian's mask cracked. The smug smile that had painted her lips was gone, replaced by something she hadn't felt in years, uncertainty.
She had meant the words as a joke.
A cruel humiliation meant to remind him of his place, but now the joke was on her. In front of hundreds of witnesses, her words had transformed into a promise. The crowd began to murmur, voices rising like waves. "She said it," one whispered. "She has to honor it." Another laughed nervously. "Imagine the headlines tomorrow, CEO forced to marry mechanic." The weight of public expectation pressed against her shoulders, and for once Vivian Cross had no clever retort. Michael didn't press her. He didn't gloat, didn't sneer, didn't rub her face in her defeat. He simply stood tall, a man who had proved himself through action rather than empty words. That dignity, that unshakable calm, cut deeper than any insult could have. Vivian looked at him, and for the first time, she saw not a mechanic, not a man with stained hands, but someone who had revealed the limits of her arrogance. She had mocked him, but he had silenced her. She had humiliated him, but he had turned her words into chains around her own pride. The crowd's laughter was gone now. In its place was respect, some genuine, some grudging, but respect nonetheless. Because they had witnessed something rare, a man who refused to bow, and in doing so, reminded them all of the power of dignity. Michael turned away from her, ready to walk back into the night, when a voice called out, "So what happens now?" It was a question that hung heavy in the air. What happens when the powerful are forced to confront their own words? What happens when dignity, pride, and truth stand taller than arrogance and wealth? For Michael, the night had only begun. The night air still hummed with the echo of the Lamborghini's engine, a roar that had silenced arrogance and turned jeers into awe. Yet in the silence that followed, all eyes shifted back to Vivian Cross. Her lips pressed together, her expression carefully composed. But the tension in her jaw betrayed her. She was cornered, not by the mechanic she mocked, but by her own words, now hanging over her like a noose woven from pride. The crowd waited. Businessmen who once bowed to her authority now whispered behind their glasses. Journalists in attendance, always hungry for scandal, leaned forward like wolves catching the scent of prey. "She said she'd marry him," someone murmured, their voice carrying farther than intended. The murmurs became a chorus, swelling with each second she remained silent. Vivian lifted her chin, refusing to show weakness. "It was a joke," she said finally, her voice sharp and cold. "Surely none of you believe I was serious." The crowd chuckled nervously, eager to side with power. Some laughed, but the sound rang hollow, because they had all heard the certainty in her voice when she made the offer. They had all seen her smirk when she tried to turn Michael into a spectacle. Now, pretending it had been humor only made her look smaller. Michael stood calm, hands at his sides, watching her, not with anger, not with mockery, but with the steady patience of a man who had endured a lifetime of such dismissals. His silence was louder than any accusation. "You're all mistaken," Vivian continued, her eyes darting across the sea of faces. It was entertainment. "Surely none of you think a CEO of my stature would actually—" She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. "Why not?" A voice cut through the air. It came from an older man near the front, a retired judge known for his sharp mind and unshakable sense of fairness. "Your words were clear. You mocked this man, set him a challenge, and he succeeded. Now you wish to dismiss him as if he were beneath the dignity of your promise. But dignity is not yours alone to define." The crowd buzzed. Vivian flushed, but she masked it quickly with a tight smile. "This is absurd. You cannot be serious." Michael finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. "You spoke to humiliate me, not to honor me. That much is clear. But I didn't fix your car for marriage. I fixed it because I could, because skill and worth aren't defined by your money or your expectations." The words carried, sinking deep into the listeners. For some, it was uncomfortable. For others, it was revelatory. Michael's dignity stood like a mirror, reflecting their own complacency in a world where status often silenced truth. Vivian stepped closer, lowering her voice but ensuring he and those nearby heard. "You think this proves anything? You fixed a machine. That's all you are. A man with dirty hands meant for dirty work. Don't mistake this moment for equality." Michael looked her in the eye, unshaken. "And yet, with these dirty hands, I accomplished what your wealth and experts could not. Tell me, what does that make you?" The words landed like a hammer. Some gasped, others clapped quietly. Vivian recoiled slightly, though her mask of confidence remained. Inside, however, a storm brewed. She had been humiliated in her own arena. Her authority challenged not by a rival CEO or a board member, but by a man society told her she could ignore. The crowd began to turn, not against her wealth, but against her arrogance. They whispered about the strength in Michael's composure, about how he had not begged, not gloated, not demanded anything. He had simply proven himself, and in that proof he exposed the smallness of her mockery. A woman stepped forward from the crowd, an influential journalist with a reputation for integrity. "Miss Cross," she said carefully, "whether you meant it as a joke or not, the symbolism of this moment is undeniable. A man you dismissed as beneath you succeeded where others failed. Surely the real story here isn't about marriage, but about the blindness of privilege." Vivian froze. That word, privilege, struck like a lash. She had built her empire on the illusion that her success was born solely of merit, not the networks, wealth, and access she had inherited. And now, in front of witnesses, someone dared strip away that illusion. Michael turned slightly toward the journalist. "I don't want her hand," he said simply, his voice steady. "I want her respect. And if she cannot give that, then her words mean nothing." The statement shifted the entire atmosphere. The crowd, once eager for a scandalous spectacle, now felt the gravity of the moment. It wasn't about a mechanic marrying a CEO, it was about dignity meeting arrogance, truth confronting pride. Vivian swallowed hard, searching for control. "Respect," she repeated, her voice low. "Respect is earned." Michael nodded. "And tonight I earned it. Not from you, perhaps, but from this crowd, from the truth of what I did." He gestured toward the car, its engine still purring quietly in the night air. "I don't need your acknowledgement to know my worth. I carry it with me." The simplicity of his words struck deeper than any insult. Vivian, for all her wealth, had nothing to stand on in that moment. Her power had always been her voice, her ability to control the narrative. But Michael had stolen that narrative, not with force, but with quiet, undeniable truth. The crowd began to disperse, some shaking Michael's hand, others offering quiet words of admiration. For once, they looked at him not as the mechanic, but as a man who had risen above mockery with grace. Vivian stood alone, the weight of humiliation heavy on her shoulders. She had meant to belittle him, to remind him of his place. But instead, he had reminded her of hers, and it wasn't as high as she imagined. As Michael prepared to leave, someone stopped him. The older judge again, his eyes thoughtful. "Son," he said, "tonight you taught this crowd a lesson they won't forget. But don't walk away too quickly. Sometimes dignity demands more than silence. It demands that the world changes because of it. Michael nodded, though his heart was heavy. He hadn't wanted spectacle, only respect. Yet deep down, he knew this was not the end. The story would spread of a black mechanic who silenced a CEO with skill and composure. And whether Vivian wanted it or not, the world would remember. Vivian watched him go, her chest tightening with emotions she couldn't name. Anger, yes, but also something else. A crack in the armor, a whisper of recognition. He wasn't just a man with dirty hands. He was the embodiment of a truth she could no longer deny. And for the first time in her life, Vivian Cross felt small. The story broke before dawn. By morning, headlines blazed across newspapers, websites, and social feeds. Mechanic silences CEO at gala. Arrogance meets its match. Black mechanic fixes Lamborghini. Humiliates billionaire host. Clips from the gala recorded on phones went viral. Millions watched the moment Vivian Cross mocked Michael, the mechanic who stood unshaken, and the roar of the Lamborghini's engine that shattered her arrogance. Viewers across the world replayed the silence that followed. How her smirk had faltered. How his calm words carried louder than her laughter. Some commentators framed it as a clash of classes, the working man versus the elite. Others framed it as a story of race, a black man standing tall against the dismissiveness of privilege. But to those who understood deeper, it was about dignity, the kind of dignity that couldn't be bought, only lived. Michael woke up that morning to find his name everywhere. His phone buzzed nonstop with messages from strangers calling him a hero, from local reporters seeking interviews, even from old friends who had once doubted him but now beamed with pride. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt the same as he had the night before. Steady, grounded, his hands still stained with grease. His heart still rooted in the belief that worth is proven by action, not status. Meanwhile, Vivian Cross sat in her glass-walled office, blinds drawn to shield her from the flashing cameras outside. Her assistant scrambled, fielding calls from investors and board members. Some were furious, others anxious. A few even praised the viral attention, though they did not understand the cost. Vivian's empire was built on respect, on the aura of untouchable authority, and in a single night, that illusion had cracked. She replayed the video on her phone, watching herself smirk, hearing the cruel lilt in her own voice. "Fix this car and I'll marry you." The crowd's laughter still echoed in her ears. But it was the silence after the engine roared that haunted her most. The way Michael had looked at her, not with hatred, not even with triumph, but with calm certainty. That look had pierced her more deeply than any insult could have. For the first time, Vivian questioned herself. Her life had been one long ascent, private schools, Ivy League education, a company inherited and then expanded under her ruthless guidance. She had believed success gave her the right to dismiss others. But now, across the world, people whispered a different story, that her arrogance had been exposed, and that a mechanic's dignity had eclipsed her wealth. Days passed. Michael returned to his garage, trying to keep life ordinary. Cars still came in broken, and he still repaired them with the same care and precision. But customers looked at him differently now. Some with admiration, others with curiosity. Reporters lingered near his shop, desperate for another statement. He gave them few words. He didn't want fame. All he had ever wanted was respect. Yet the story would not fade. Talk shows debated it. Professors cited it in lectures about class and dignity. Churches used it as a parable for humility. To many, Michael had become more than a mechanic. He had become a symbol. And Vivian felt the weight of that symbol pressing against her chest. Every meeting she attended, every deal she tried to close. Eyes followed her not with awe, but with judgment. Some board members whispered about removing her, fearing her image had been tarnished beyond repair. For the first time in her life, Vivian found herself powerless. One evening, unable to silence the storm inside her, she drove without chauffeurs, without assistance, to the modest garage where Michael worked. The place smelled of oil and metal, its walls lined with tools. Michael was there, sleeves rolled up, bent over the hood of a sedan. He didn't notice her at first. He was too focused, too absorbed in the rhythm of his craft. When he finally looked up, his eyes widened slightly in recognition, but his posture remained calm. "You found your way here," he said simply. Vivian hesitated, the words heavy in her throat. For once, she had no crowd to impress, no cameras to perform for. It was just her, stripped of power, standing before the man she had tried to belittle. "I came to apologize," she said, the words foreign on her tongue. "Not because the world is watching, but because I was wrong." Michael studied her face, searching for truth. And what exactly were you wrong about? Vivian's voice faltered, but she pressed on. About you. About men like you. I thought wealth gave me the right to mock, to dismiss. But you showed me it doesn't. You showed the world. Silence filled the space between them. The sound of a clock ticking on the wall. The faint drip of oil into a pan. The hum of the city beyond the garage doors. I don't need your apology, Michael said finally. What I need, what the world needs, is for people like you to remember what respect means. Not just in front of cameras, not when it's convenient. Always. Vivian lowered her eyes. For once, she couldn't argue. Couldn't dismiss. She nodded. Then I'll start here. She pulled a business card from her bag, but Michael shook his head before she could extend it. I don't want a place in your company. I don't want to be a token of your change, he said firmly. I already have a place. Right here, doing work that matters. If you've learned anything, let it be this. Dignity isn't charity. It isn't something you hand down to others. It's something you honor in everyone you meet. Vivian's hand trembled, the card still between her fingers. Slowly she put it away. Then I'll carry that lesson, she said softly. Michael nodded once, then turned back to the car he was repairing. To him, the conversation was done. To Vivian, it was only the beginning of a long journey toward humility. In the weeks that followed, the story faded from headlines, replaced by new scandals, new distractions, but its echo remained. In quiet conversations, in boardrooms and classrooms, people still spoke of the night of Black. Mechanic silenced a billionaire, CEO with nothing but skill and dignity. And though Michael never sought fame, he could not escape the truth. His story had become more than his own. It belonged to anyone who had ever been mocked, dismissed, or underestimated. It belonged to every man and woman who carried their worth quietly, waiting for the world to see. As for Vivian, she changed. Not overnight, not completely, but undeniably. At meetings, she listened more. At galas, she no longer used her voice as a weapon. And sometimes, late at night, she still heard the roar of that engine in her mind, a sound that reminded her of the night. She was forced to confront her own pride. Michael remained where he always belonged, in his garage, hands steady, eyes calm, dignity intact. He needed no validation, no headlines, no promises, for in the end he had proven the truth once and for all. That worth is not measured by wealth or power. It is measured by the quiet strength of a soul that refuses to bow. And that night, long remembered, was proof that dignity can silence even the loudest arrogance.